Hey, it's Sol with another video, and today we're going to talk about the Benthic Armor system and how this can relate to the future of the world of Warcraft. Just a word of warning though, this is exactly as exciting as it sounds. Now that we're a few weeks into the patch and everyone, including myself, has got their mitts into it, I'm gonna go all in with my opinions on not just today's Benthic Armor system, but what takeaways can be applied to the future. As you may already know, Benthic Armor is a hybrid progression system that was launched in this patch, patch 8.2. The gear is usable in any content, but the ecosystem, as well as its maximum potential, is focused mostly on the Nazjatar Zone and the Eternal Palace raid. So what do I mean by a hybrid system? Benthic gear is one part catch-up gear, one part upgradable progression. And we haven't seen a system of this sort before, at least not at this scale. Many fans refer back to the days of Valor upgrades from Mists of Pandaria or Warlords of Draenor as if they were the exact same thing, and it's definitely not. If you recall, the old upgrade system was limited to upgrading the piece of gear by a mere 10 item levels, which meant that a piece of Raid Finder gear would still not be as good as a piece of normal gear after upgrades. What Benthic Armor does is take a piece of gear that is a step below Raid Finder item level, and it takes it all the way up to just below heroic level. That's more than just a really big upgrade, that is pretty much a system of progression. Also, unlike crafted gear from Warlords of Draenor, where you can only wear up to 3 pieces at a time, you can deck yourself out with multiple pieces of Benthic Armor, except for weapons, trinkets, and of course the neck slot. So what do I like about Benthic gear? What really works? I think it's a very accessible system. It's a way to get a player's foot in the door. The base item level for Benthic Armor is cheap to buy with prismatic monopearls or pearls that are found in the Nazjatar Zone. You could also randomly find it from treasure chests or world quests. There are individual Benthic items per armor slot, unlike baleful gear from Warlords, where you'd roll a baleful weapon, a baleful armor piece, or a baleful trinket token, and you would hope for the best. This isn't so much a plus, but more of an improvement on the original system, giving us more control over what we want. Because of the higher upgrade cost, the cost of upgrades scales at a rate that I think is pretty reasonable. Part of what makes the MMO and roleplay experience fun, I'm telling you what's fun, is for the pacing of progression to feel good. Not too slow, that it's a hell of a grind, but not too fast that it's trivial and less fulfilling. Luck plays a role too, but I like how the luck plays mostly into how many pearls you can get a hold of in a day, as opposed to say, oh boy, I really hope a legendary or a Titanforged thing drops. Oh, it didn't? Bummer. But what do I not like about Benthic gear? There are some big problems with it that have sparked a lot of conversation and debate. It's my expectation that if upgradable gear returns, that some of these things are addressed, but in the meantime, here it goes. The first is that Benthic gear can proc tertiary stats. Things like avoidance, speed, but most importantly, a gem socket. This alone turns the base Benthic tokens into a system of gambling that I'm not really fond of at all. It introduces another layer of randomness that takes a non-socketed piece of Benthic gear, and people can see it as trash, as some would like to say. We don't want to feel like the 200 and some pearls that we spent on our gear was wasted because, well, it could have had a socket. I think it hamstrings the experience when we're spending resources rolling Benthic tokens looking for not just the best in slots, but the best in slots with a socket. Ooh. This sounds like Titanforging. This sounds like loot boxes. Go figure. The special effects of Benthic gear are pretty cool, but they only work in Nazjatar and the Eternal Palace, making it far less effective in Mechagon, the other zones throughout the world, or in PvP. Yet at the same time, according to sims and websites, the effects of Benthic gear are arguably more effective than Mythic gear in the Eternal Palace raid, threatening the excitement of obtaining gear during progression. So depending on the content you do, Benthic gear is either too powerful or it's a total waste of time. Finally, and this is closely related to one of my earlier points, this system of upgrading gear exists only in one ecosystem, which is world content, in one zone. You don't see upgradable PvP gear that you buy from a vendor using Marks of Honor, for example. Meanwhile, on another corner of content, while you're saving up Titan Residuum for that Azeroth piece you really need, what are you spending your Titan Residuum on? Nothing. I've made it no secret that I'm a big fan of upgradable gear. I think back to Warlords of Draenor crafting as one of my favorite variations of the crafting system. So before I talk about how Benthic gear can be applied in WoW's future, let's talk about alternate systems that we're more familiar with, but in my opinion they're just not as good. And by alternative systems, I'm talking about Titanforging and Valor, or basically badge-like vendors. Titanforging still feels too random, given that its rewards have a close relationship to playtime instead of merit, luck, and not exactly work. Did it drop? Huh? Did it max Titanforge? Oh, and did it socket? Blizzard calls it a moment of excitement and surprise, but I'm going to throw this opinion out there and say that many players during Legion, and even now in BFA, see it as the one good moment after a series of disappointments. Blizzard has tried to improve on this with so-called bad luck protection back in Legion, but you know what else would be very good bad luck protection? Valor and a vendor. Meanwhile, badge gear offers the promise of a reward after hard work. But one big pain point I felt back in those days was that there were many times that I would end the day with maybe some Valor points, but the times when I would actually get something cool with said points was few and far between. Which brings me back to why Benthic gear is pretty awesome. It has a very low barrier of entry. You can have control over the items you want, and then you invest into them. You make them stronger. You can feel the difference with every incremental upgrade on a more frequent basis. It gets you to log in, and I guess max out that time played according to those ActiBliz eggheads, however you want to spin it. I think that upgradable gear in future expansions has a lot of potential, and it doesn't have to only exist in a limited space like Benthic gear does in this current patch. It can potentially expand to all of the pillars or corners of World of Warcraft gameplay, from world content to dungeons and raids. I think it can be a really exciting system. So today we're going to scratch the surface and explore that idea. However, just talking about this idea has the potential for opening a ton of issues, drawbacks, and what ifs that even if I had all day, I wouldn't be able to address them in a way that would convince you, yes, the future is in fact Benthic. Knowing that the rest of this video is going to be filled with flawed ideas, I encourage you to at least open your mind and take in the merit of what I have to say today, and just consider the possibilities for tomorrow's World of Warcraft. First, let's clean up some of the flaws of today's Benthic system. I decided to remove the bonus from the initial token because I want players to be spending less time rolling for a bonus socket and more time working to upgrade the gear that they want. There's a line between luck and gambling, and even if the overall impact isn't entirely game-breaking, Benthic gear, in my opinion, crosses that line. Next, let's not have throughput effects like the Benthic gear has because it causes the whole best in slot itemization to gear with those effects, or at least it heavily leans that way. The trade-off in this case would be to give all gear special effects or to compensate with a greater amount of secondary stats. But for now, I'm just going to consider leaning away from special effects altogether. However, softer utility bonuses like run speed or fall damage reduction, that won't hurt, right? Finally, we're going to give upgradable gear to each of WoW's corners of gameplay. There will be vendors selling gear that's unique to your playstyle and will use its own currency. So for PvP, we'll use Conquest points. Dungeons and Mythic Plus will use Justice points. And world content will use pearls, I suppose, because at least at the moment that seems familiar. But going all in with this so-called world of Vendorcraft, it sounds like a little bit too much. So like today's Benthic system, we can still have gear drop from dungeons, raids, and PvP strongboxes. This doesn't have to be set in stone, but let's go with weapons, rings, trinkets, and that sort. That'll be what fills loot tables for raids, dungeons, and PvP. With upgrades and currency as the prominent and not just an optional way to progress, we can strip away some of the luck-based systems. So this means things like Titanforging, Warforging, extra world tokens, systems of hope or false hope, all that stuff can go away. In their multiple defenses of Titanforging, Blizzard has said that they want players to feel okay with repeating the same content over and over in the course of a season, just in case there's a moment of surprise. But you know what's better than surprise? The peace of mind that you're in here farming to max out your gear with some currency. So what kind of World of Warcraft might we have with this system? Let's pretend that we're at the start of the new expansion and it's the first day of the first season. All of our currencies are at 0. I'm not going to get into the nuance of every little detail, but The way that I see it, the pacing of this system should be designed in such a way that by week's end, dedicated players can earn enough currency between the different corners of content that they can already obtain a good number of the pieces that they want to work on for the remainder of the season. The premise is pretty much the same as how Benthic gear is now. It's easy to start, but it'll take a reasonable amount of dedication to max out your upgrades. But by the end of the season, a slightly above average player should be able to fully upgrade every available slot to the max, while dedicated players will be able to max out multiple pieces, maybe even multiple sets, to suit their alternative roles or specs. And at the end of the season, whatever currency that you have is reset to 0 and the treadmill trudges along. So imagine that. You can plan and earn your best in slot gear within days via vendor. The grind will lie in powering up and unlocking its full potential. The luck is kind of based on how quickly it'll take you to max that out, based on perhaps there might be a range of how much conquest or valor or pearls that you get in a day. Under this new system, players will primarily be working through two parallel systems of gearing. One is through vendors and upgrades with plenty of choice and a clear path to incremental upgrades. The other is the tried and true, the traditional sense of just killing bosses for drops. Like I said, there are a lot of issues and obstacles to deal with, but this is just my opinion. I don't think juggling multiple currencies is going to be one of those problems. We already deal with Conquest and Titan Residuum, Pearls, and etceteras, but familiar and consistent currencies like Valor and Conquest are something that I'm pretty confident that players are going to get too confused over. Here's what I think is the biggest obstacle though, and it has to do with the feeling, the mindset of being rewarded. Because at the heart of the matter with shifting towards this uneven mix of upgrades and drops is how rewarding will difficult content be now? Won't loot tables be kind of cut in half with this change? Imagine much smaller raid and dungeon loot tables, limited to, I guess using this example, rings, trinkets, and weapons. It sounds pretty limited, or is it? What if these items had their own unique flavor or personality depending on the source? Like a weapon from PvP actually doing bonus damage to other players, or trinkets that had a powerful bonus effect in the raid that it was found in. What if rings having set bonuses was a normal thing? And whether you received one of these coveted drops or not, at the very least, you'll get some currency you can use to upgrade your existing gear. The biggest issue that I would see, at least with this very particular example, would be with transmog and the need for multiple sets of gear based on difficulty or your class. But it would be pretty cool to have a base weapon with its transmog, and then after several upgrades it'll transform into something cooler and you unlock an additional transmog from that. This is entirely based on the premise that upgradable gear only comes from a vendor. Maybe upgradable gear can drop in certain places. Or different items altogether could be upgradable, and we can return to an era of armor set bonuses or something. So this is what I mean about just me wanting to scratch the surface on changing loot like this, discuss its possibilities. I should stop here before things get way too confusing, especially for me. There are a lot of other questions to ask that really I don't have answers to, like what's the experience going to be like for alts? Is there going to be some sort of catch-up system? What if you're jumping into a tier? What if you're jumping in mid-tier? How far behind will you be? Is there going to be a difference on how much currency you obtain per difficulty? Is there going to be a difference at all? How the heck is this going to work in Mythic Plus, considering that moving from one season to the next, a lot of players, they already have a lot of gear. Should you be able to scrap or disenchant your upgraded gear mid-tier so you can get your currency back and apply it somewhere else? Should there be some sort of maximum amount of currency that you can get a week? How are armor crafting professions going to play into this? There are a lot of questions, but just because there are a lot of things to hash out and deal with, it doesn't mean that a system like this can't work at all. I might not have even come close to selling the idea that upgradable gear can be a thing, game-wide, in the future. But I hope I at least got you thinking about the possibilities, and as always, I enjoy discussing stuff like this over in the comments, or Discord, or over on Twitch even. That's going to be it for today, so please like the video if you enjoyed yourself, and subscribe for more of this and all things Warcraft. I'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.